Hi everybody, hope you're all doing well out there, and a very warm welcome back to At the Movies with Andrew. I am the titular Andrew, and now that the year of 2018 is well and truly done with, it is now custom to pick up a great big stick and poke at its fresh corpse to see what we can discern from it. And in that light-hearted tone, let's start off with the list that will probably wind up getting the most views, because the internet thrives on sadism and suffering. Yes, we're talking about my top 5 worst movies that I saw at the cinema during 2018. Why top 5, I hear you ask? Because I'm an average Joe. I'm not a paid movie critic, I don't see everything, and when I see titles like Show Dogs or Slender Man or Sherlock Gnomes, and I hear about the rotten reputation that these releases are already gaining, I have enough sense to go, I am not going to invest my time and money in that. And to be fair, personally, I found that 2018 wasn't as bad a year as 2017 in terms of cinema releases, mostly because there weren't quite as many franchise killers or non-starters. You know, things like Pirates of the Caribbean 5 or King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, movies that are going, this is the first of a planned series of 6 movies that I hope you will come and see and invest in that. And audiences and critics then as unison go, no, we're not. There wasn't so much of that this year, but that being said, there was certainly a continued feeling that if your name isn't Disney or Marvel and you are releasing a billion-dollar gamble, that's precisely what it is, a gamble. And then when they make single-digit figures at the box office or single-digit ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, the sense of despair and panic from the studios afterwards is still pretty palpable. And refusenicks like me that still go to the cinema wonder why everybody is just choosing to stay at home and watch things on their laptops. With that established, let's get started, shall we? Let's start off with some dishonourable mentions, i.e. the movies that couldn't quite make my numbered list but still infuriated me enough to quickly rattle through them. And I'm starting off with Downsizing. This had so much potential as a concept. You have a world where they've worked out a way to scientifically shrink people. And that proposes all kinds of questions. Would that reduce our carbon footprint on the Earth? Would tiny people have their own little societies and gated off communities? And how will normal big people react to those little communities? How would society and civilization change? You've got a proper sci-fi what-if concept. And for the first half of the movie, it did look like it was going in that direction, until they did a sudden heel turn in the middle and we started focusing on Matt Damon being freshly divorced and having a midlife crisis, moping around and being shacked up with a Vietnamese aid worker with the most ear-gratingly irritating broken English voice this side of the "me so horny" prostitute from Full Metal Jacket. Pacific Rim 2 Uprising. The very second that I heard that Guillermo del Toro and someone with his vision and scope was not going to come back for the sequel, I had a feeling that this was going to be an inferior product to the original. And I was right. You've got basically a noisy toy commercial with lots of pandering to that lucrative Chinese market, with Chinese characters helping to save the world. You've got a comic relief character from the original being upgraded to villain status and now coming across like Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. And I haven't seen any of the Michael Bay Transformers sequels, but I can now get a sense, thanks to this movie, how noisy and brainless and relentless that those movies are. So thanks for that. On the subject of movies that should probably be just regarded as popcorn entertainment, but still emptied half of my brain enough to make me rattle off its faults here, is Rampage. The villains were straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon, and that's no exaggeration. I mean, sis, what's the FBI going to do once they find out we're responsible for the monster rampage? Trust me, little brother, I know exactly how to divert their attention. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's FBI character was pretty much Negan out of The Walking Dead, complete with tilting his back and going, "My grandpappy had a saying about troublemakers." Naomi Harris was basically explainy science lady who was riddled with clunky exposition like, "Have you ever heard of genetic editing?" Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is able to survive bullet wounds with virtually no explanation whatsoever. But ultimately, what can we expect from a movie that was adapted from an 80s arcade game about a gorilla, an alligator, and a wolf tearing up a city? I mean, it was never going to be high art, was it? The Darkest Minds. Hang on a minute. Didn't this whole young adult dystopian adaptation genre die once Katniss Everdeen ended the Hunger Games? I mean, the third Divergent movie was received so poorly that they didn't even bother to do the concluding fourth chapter and wrap up that long-running saga. Nobody cared about the fifth wave, and the Maze Runner trilogy had a very slow and painful trudge towards its conclusion. So aren't we done with this? Try telling that to Hollywood. Yes, this example had all the typical angst riddled with it. You're young and you're different and you're an outcast, which means you have the power to change the world. Yes, the actors involved were trying with their chemistry, but you still had the angst, you still had the love triangle with one boy going, "You're exactly like me, we should work together," and then the very next scene the other boy goes, "I don't think you should see him anymore, I don't trust him." And because this is the first in a trilogy of books that this is adapted from, we have the Golden Compass syndrome. We have the sheer bloody nerve to end on a cliffhanger that will never be resolved. The boy has run into the forest. Will he ever come back? The best friend is in a coma. Will he ever wake up? The bad guy survived the explosion, but now he's got burn marks on his face and he'll come back. And the young rebel protagonist lead girl is standing on a podium with all the other children going, "The war has just begun and we will continue this story in part 2. No, no, you won't. Another movie that here's one that I've rattled on before, the Happy Time Murders. You could tell that this was a concept that was at least 10 years too late to reach it to the big screen. I mean, it's Muppets, but imagine if they had sex in front of us and they swore all the time. Meet the Feebles. Seriously, just go and watch Meet the Feebles. That movie at least has more wit and craft and invention put into it, like a Vietnam flashback, whereas this is just coasting on silly string jizz and glitter urine and Melissa McCarthy doing her usual Melissa McCarthy shtick of falling over every 5 seconds. Here's another old favourite, Venom. Tom Hardy sacrificed his dignity in the best superhero film of 1997. The CGI was straight out of a PlayStation 2 hack and slash game, but at least the Chinese theatrical poster was pretty. Am I right? And last on the dishonourable mentions, Mortal Engines, the generic, cliched, cookie cutter, $100 million Peter Jackson fantasy that everybody has already forgotten about. Yeah, I saw it. Somebody had to. Right, starting off our numbered entries now, and at number 5. I am breaking one of my own personal rules here, and I am making this a tie break. I don't normally do this, I should stress. I do like to try a little harder to prioritise one awful cinema experience over another awful cinema experience, but in this case, both these movies were made by the same studio, and both of them share very similar problems, so let's go for it, shall we? Let's make number 5 a tie-break between A Wrinkle in Time and The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. Some of us are a little worried or disheartened that Disney's monopoly over Hollywood is growing stronger by the day, especially with the upcoming Fox takeover. But imagine, if you will, a parallel universe, a divergent timeline, where Disney never bought Marvel Studios, where they didn't acquire Star Wars, where they didn't suddenly feel the need to update and remake their old movies, because taking fairy tale cartoons and making them realistic and CGI automatically makes them better, apparently. What kind of live action cinematic output would we be getting from Disney every year? Well, I can tell you, it's CGI laden splooge like these two movies. First, with A Wrinkle in Time, what do you get when you take a 60s sci-fi fantasy children's book and remove all the Christian allegory? You get the cinematic equivalent of a Hallmark birthday greetings card about being true to yourself, and family and friendship is a bond that time and space can't break. And that's it. The lead girl was whiny. The boyfriend character did not need to be there on their journey, like at all. The kid brother was the worst, most ear-gratingly annoying case of child acting I've seen since Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 1. And yeah, you've got a movie in which Reese Witherspoon, who's seemingly on meth, runs through a meadow on a planet of talking flowers, turns into a flying cabbage creature. The kids get on the cabbage creature and fly around and reach a 60-foot Oprah Winfrey who's dressed up like a Super Saiyan, and the boy reaches out to touch her cheek and she goes, "Ah, yes, you may, my child." And I'm going there thinking, blimey, this stuff's really kicking in now. But at least with A Wrinkle in Time, you can kind of make the argument that had a ton of bug nuts crazy ideas, whereas The Nutcracker and the Four Realms was the very definition of uninspired, of taking a typical fantasy with a chosen one character going to a magical land and having absolutely no effort put into it. The lead girl suddenly drew inspiration and confidence out of nowhere. The titular Nutcracker character was a side character, a sidekick who was about as interesting as milquetoast. Keira Knightley. The second I saw the trailer and I saw her saying, "Have you come to save us from Mother Ginger, Clara?" I knew that had the potential to derail the entire movie. And one scene you have her resurrecting a tin soldier army and going, "Hello, boys." And then in another scene, you have a little CGI mouse going on the Nutcracker's shoulder and him going, "Good to see you, my friend," and the little mouse giving a little squeak and a fist bump. And I'm going, do you know who your movie is aimed for? Is this for little children or what? At number 4, we have Mute. Little side story here. England suffered a huge snowstorm at the end of February, beginning of March last year, and I was on holiday from work, so I had no real obligation to go outside. I could stay in the warmth, I could build a snowman, and then out of pure chance, I saw that the latest movie from a director that I admire, the son of David Bowie, was playing at 1 or 2 cinemas for 1 week only before going straight to Netflix. And it was playing at a cinema within reasonable travel distance. So I got on the train and I braved the transport system that was suffering under these snowy conditions. I got there. Sure enough, I was the only person going to see this movie, like at all, and the few staff members that had managed to turn up were giving me bemused and befuddled looks of, "Why did you even bother coming? I mean, are you sure you don't want to go and see Black Panther?" But no, I went to see it, and I was the only one in there. And you know what else is funny? Couple of years ago, I went to see the director's previous movie, the World of Warcraft movie, under less snowy circumstances, and I was the only person who went to see that movie back then, and the cinema staff back then were giving me pitying glances. I mean, Duncan Jones, this is the guy that made Moon and Source Code. What happened to him? What's he done? What's happened to him? I can see that he wanted to make a near-futuristic thriller, like Blade Runner, except Netflix did not give him the budget to justify that on a cinematic scale, and unfortunately we did get an actual sequel to Blade Runner the previous year, so this loses any impact it may have had. Alexander Skarsgård is a mute Amish bartender. Yes, really. And he spends the movie going around looking for his lost waitress girlfriend. And most of the time he comes across gangsters who are either going, "She left you, isn't it obvious? You should just go home, I'm not helping you." Or they beat him to a near bloody pulp. Every time, lather, rinse, repeat. I don't expect all my action movie protagonists to know kung fu, but when you have this cycle repeated again and again, it becomes less and less of a motivation to root for this guy. Meanwhile, you've got this side plot that takes a long time to get to how it's connecting with plot A, with Paul Rudd with the most magnificent handlebar mustache ever committed to film, called surgeon called Cactus Bill, and his partner named Duck. It is a very bad sign when your most compelling characters are called Cactus Bill and Duck, by the way. The latter is played by Justin Theroux, and he's a doctor, and he's a paedophile. And they spend a long time lingering on the fact that he's a paedophile. Oh, I'll just set this camera on your backside and I'll record this data for medical purposes. So you have characters in this movie who are either unsympathetic, unlikable, or just plain incompetent. At number 3, we have the worst action mainstream blockbuster I went to see this year, The Predator. Yet another sad example of other studios looking at Marvel Avengers superhero movies and trying to work out what the essence is of that and try and copy it. I don't mean in terms of how can we start a franchise like last year's output. More in the sense of characters are quipping and joking all the time, so we need to have our characters joking and making jokes and deconstructing the very genre or story that they're in at the expense of any integrity that this plot may have. Well, what you've described isn't a predator. It sounds more like a sports hunter. Yeah, well, we took a vote. Predator sounds cooler. Am I right, guys? Ha 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 ha. And everybody behaving like the badass macho hero character, even the villain. We have a truce now, but once we deal with this alien, you and I are gonna dance. I'll bring the tap dancing shoes. And that's sort of infuriating, hard to take any of this seriously. I mean, to be fair, the director was Shane Black, who's known for this kind of quippy, smart stuff. And if anybody was going to bring back this franchise, you get somebody who was in the original movie, right? Except he's he is beholden to the studio and forced to do a re-edit, which makes the climax sloppily paced and poorly edited to the extent that it took me 10 minutes to realise that two supporting characters had been killed in the forest, and it would happen so quickly I couldn't even notice it. But what tipped this over the edge for me was the hero's son, who is autistic, and the way that his autism is portrayed. To be fair, Jacob Tremblay does a good job of it, a convincing performance, and they do go through the usual Hollywood tropes of this is what autism is, like chess pieces get knocked over and he's able to remember where every single piece was put. I mean, okay, fine, fair enough. A bit limiting, but I get you need to establish what this boy is like. And there was a scene when he's talking with his father about if we're going to die, I need to tell you, Dad, I'm very sorry that I didn't turn out the way you and Mum expected of me. And that did strike a personal chord with my own childhood, I have to say. But apart from that, two things. One, Olivia Munn's doctor scientist lady, yeah, let's just call her that, makes a speech about, you know, some people think that autism is not a defect. Some people say autism is the next step in human evolution. I mean, far be it from me to disparage what might be an actual scientific theory that I've never heard of, but I find it incredibly doubtful that Charles Xavier is going to come round to my house and recruit me into the X-Men, which I wouldn't mind. Patrick Stewart or James McAvoy, I don't care. But then it gets worse. The lead predator who comes to kill the first predator, so the title The Predator is already a lie, sees that this boy is such a genius that he can decode their alien language and decode their technology. And since it's established that predators absorb the DNA traits of other species to make them stronger, he's going to kidnap this boy, take his DNA or body and extract it to implant into other members of his race to make the predator race stronger. He is going to weaponize autism and put autism in his people because that will make them stronger and better as a species, as a warrior race. I can't really add to that. In the runner-up spot, we have the last chapter in a series that I have put at number 2 or number 3 in past years, and that is 50 Shades Freed. What is there to say about this film and this trilogy in general that hasn't already been said on the internet a billion times over, usually in anger? Yes. You had a already poorly received book series about BDSM and toxic sexual relationships being adapted for the big screen. And because you're Hollywood and you want to appeal to a wide audience, you don't commit to that premise. You have Jamie Dornan refusing to take his trousers off for sex scenes, and you've got wandering around expensive locations, living the aspirational lifestyle with all the depth and the sophistication and emotion of the cover of Vogue magazine. And this time around, we didn't even get a hilarious helicopter crash or Kim Basinger with a heavily Botoxed face to entertain us like the last movie. I mean, sure, you've got revelations about Christian Grey's childhood and life that this whole trilogy's been building up to, but at this point it's shot with all the flat angles and depth of a American soap opera, so who even cares? I will say that the creepy, stubbly ex-publisher antagonist reached Sideshow Bob levels of villainy this time around, so that was kind of amusing. But at the end, they have a 5-minute montage of all the now the journey is over. Let's look at all the highlights of the trilogy in a montage. Let's look at Anna and Christian. Remember that time they were on a boat? Remember that time they were on a plane? Remember that time they went to this beach? Remember this time they went to his luxury pad and made unconvincing sex for the 4th or 5th time? And right there and then, me and the other 2 people that were in the cinema were just left thinking, yeah, that's over now. Let's see, yeah, to add to what other people have said on the internet, the one good thing that this movie did is that it ended the trilogy and it's all over now. And you can, and before you say they did another book about the same story but from Christian Grey's perspective, that could be a movie. You try getting Jamie Dornan and Dakota Fanning to come back now that their contracts have officially expired. See how keen they are to come back to this. But yeah, that montage, that sinking feeling that now it was over, all I can take away from this is that that was 6 collective hours of my life that I'll never get back. So thanks a bunch. Now, you may be wondering, 50 Shades Freed should have been at #1, right? Because we all know how bad that is. But that's kind of the point. We all know how bad that is. It's like the other 2 movies. I deliberately did not place it at the top because it's kind of low-hanging fruit at this point. I like to try and look for something that nobody or not that many people have heard of as my worst of the year. And boy, oh boy, did I strike gold this year. My #1 worst movie of 2018 was Terminal. Now, who's heard of this? Any hands up? Who's heard of this? Yeah? No, it's not the Tom Hanks stuck at an airport movie. Right, lots of hands coming down. Margot Robbie? Simon Pegg? Dexter Fletcher? Anybody? Right. I caught the teaser trailer for this near the beginning of the year and I was intrigued enough. A neo-noir thriller with Margot Robbie as this crazy looking lady. It piqued my interest. And then when it came time to it coming out, I discovered that it was only playing at four cinemas across the entire country. So my spider sense was definitely tingled at that point. So unfortunately, one of the cinemas was in reasonable walking distance of my workplace, so I went to check it out. It was in a big cavernous cinema with only about 6 other people apart from me there. So this movie, this neo-noir thriller. I'm probably generalizing here. Do correct me if you disagree, but I think it's fair to say, growing up at high school and college, I noticed a lot of this. Every adolescent boy with a handheld camera wants to be the next Quentin Tarantino. They want to be the next Guy Ritchie. So they get their friends round with a handheld camera and say, hey, let's make our own crime comedy caper. Let's have all the cliches in there, like we have to do a deal for the boss, and the boss is all like, you better do this deal right or I'll cut your balls off. Let's have a scene in a cafe where they talk about trivial things, because Quentin Tarantino did it in Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. Let's have a bit of blood and gore and shock violence in it. Let's have a third act twist where they go, so the deal has gone wrong. One of you has grasped us, haven't they? It was you, wasn't it? No, it was you, wasn't it? And then the other person is aggressive, like, don't point that gun at me or I'll point that gun at you, Sunshine. And then they kill each other, and it turns out that the the person who betrayed them was a supporting character in the background the whole time. Woo! Let's go to that derelict warehouse in the neighborhood, or let's go to my dad's office after work. Let's put on some suits, let's get some ketchup, and ooh, we've done a Quentin Tarantino that nobody will ever see. Except this script somehow got A-list talent and a location that is so obviously a disused rat hole warehouse in Budapest. And it's got a majority of the cliches that you can see coming a mile away. I mean, the characters in this movie all want to get to meet Mr. Franklin, the mysterious Mr. Franklin, who's most of the time is this electronic voice on the phone. I want you to do a deal for me, and you don't know who it is. Meanwhile, at the beginning of the movie, Mike Myers, yes, that Mike Myers, is basically this jovial comic relief character. He's basically Dr. Evil in a station janitor's outfit, whistling Danny Boy down the platform going, pay no attention to me, governor, I'm just the cleaner. You be wanting the 404 train going north tomorrow morning. I'll be on my merry way then, 'cause I'm nobody important. You're Mr. Franklin. You are so obviously going to turn out to be Mr. Franklin at the end. So you've got cliches, and because you decide you're going to make this a nondescript Neverworld city, you're going to throw Alice in Wonderland subtext in here with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Case in point, Margot Robbie is this sultry, mysterious seductress who's leading all the male characters along, taking them to different places and getting them to meet up at different times, dressed up as a stripper in a white rabbit outfit. Do you get it? And saying lines like, we're all mad around here. You have to be mad as a hatter. Yeah. And not only that, but also meeting up with Simon Pegg's side character who's thinking of committing suicide and jovially talking about but the best way to commit suicide, that's meant to come off as deep and thoughtful and intellectual, but it just comes across as a 15-year-old who's written a script who doesn't know how depression or mental health works. And like I said, the two gangster characters talk about how to hold guns the right way, like in the movies, because, like I said, Quentin Tarantino. But what tipped this over the edge for me what confirmed this as an awful movie for me is the twist ending, which I'm just going to spoil for you right here. So, I don't know, cover your ears or something. Margot Robbie has tricked all the other supporting characters into killing each other. So now she gets to meet Mr. Franklin. And surprise, surprise, Mike Myers ditches his suddenly loses his hunch like Kaiser Soze, and he rips off his old man mask, and it was him the whole time. So, but why did Margot Robbie go to such lengths to meet Mr. Franklin? And more to the point, how could Margot Robbie be a waitress talking to Simon Pegg, and in the very next scene she's the stripper in the nightclub talking to Dexter Fletcher and his partner? How can she be having a phone conversation with her lover boy, and we see her standing in an alleyway in the background whilst this is happening? You could be forgiven for thinking that this was very poorly edited, like I did, but no. 1 minute, Margot Robbie is standing in front of Mike Myers, and then suddenly Margot Robbie is standing behind Mike Myers as well, and they go, "Yes, we're twins, and we're your illegitimate daughters that you tried to burn to death when we were children." When this happens, like I said, there are about 6 other people in the cinema, and the guy sitting directly in front of me audibly huffed, got out, and stormed out of the cinema 5 minutes before the end. This movie was so bad that the one guy who come all the way from Essex or Leicestershire or wherever it was to specifically see this movie stormed out before the end to angrily ask for a refund. That's how bad this movie is. And they knew, the distributors knew what a mess they had. Why else would you only release this in 4 theatres? Why would you deliberately release this on the week when the nation would be preoccupied with how well England were doing in the World Cup? Sometimes I look at films, small films, that are only being released in a handful of cinemas, and depending on genre or stars or directors, like with Mute, my curiosity will be piqued that I go out of my way to see it. And then I discover 8 or 9 times out of 10 that the distributors knew that they had a turd on their hands and wanted to bury it as quickly and as quietly as possible. So, you've probably already decided, having even not heard of this movie, that you're not going to give it your time or money or interest. But if you can take one thing away from this, it's just that sometimes I do this to myself. And with that, that's all the crud of last year out of the way. What were your worst movies of 2018? If you've got any that you'd like to share, please put them in the comments section below. In the meantime, I will see you again soon with a much more pleasurable experience with my best movies of 2018. In the meantime, please continue to like and subscribe and view Matt's Movies, Music and More, and I will see you again. Peace out.